I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would spy on his wife, let alone track her movements like some paranoid lunatic. Lisa and I had been together for over a decade, built a life, had 2 kids, and settled into what I believed was a stable marriage. She was my best friend, my partner, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. But lately, something had shifted, like a slow-moving crack in the foundation of our marriage that I only noticed once it had spread too far to ignore. It started subtly, small things I could explain away if I tried hard enough. She became distant, less interested in conversation, less affectionate. She was always exhausted, too tired for any intimacy, always busy with work, always just distracted. At first, I blamed it on stress. I told myself that we were both just caught up in the grind of parenting and work, and that eventually, things would settle back into place. But they didn't. Instead, she became secretive. She started guarding her phone like it held the codes to a nuclear arsenal. She never used to have a password, and suddenly, she did. If I so much as glanced at her screen, she would tilt it away, clutch it to her chest, or, on one occasion, walk into another room and shut the door behind her. Then came the late nights. She had never been the type to stay out much, but suddenly, she had meetings that ran late, impromptu girls' nights that stretched until midnight, errands that took hours longer than they should have. The first time I woke up in the middle of the night and found her side of the bed empty, I assumed she was in the bathroom. But when I walked through the house and saw that the minivan was gone, a cold, creeping dread settled into my chest. The next morning, when I asked her where she had been, she barely hesitated before saying, "I couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive." Just like that. Casual. No guilt, no nervousness, just a shrug and a sip of coffee, as if it were a completely normal thing for a married woman with 2 kids to disappear in the middle of the night without telling her husband. That was when I knew something was wrong. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really had just gone for a drive to clear her head. But then it happened again. And again. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the way she always seemed just a little too defensive when I asked her anything about where she had been. I started to notice that she was dressing up more when she left the house, putting on makeup, wearing perfume, slipping into outfits that were far too nice for a casual dinner with friends. When I asked her why she was suddenly putting in all this effort, she just laughed and said, "Can't a girl want to look good?" And I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But something deep in my gut told me she was lying. That's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I bought a GPS tracker online. It was small, discreet, and easy to attach to the underside of the minivan. I told myself I was only doing this to ease my own paranoia, to prove to myself that I was just being insecure. For a few days, I checked it constantly, watching her movements like a hawk. Everything seemed normal: work, errands, school pickups. Nothing out of the ordinary. And then, last Thursday night, I caught her. She told me she was going to Emma's house for a wine night. I watched her get ready, curling her hair, putting on a tight red dress, slipping on heels that she had no business wearing just to sit around with her friends. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I forced a smile, kissed her goodbye, and waited until she pulled out of the driveway. The second she was gone, I pulled up the tracker on my phone. She never went to Emma's. Instead, she drove across town to an industrial area, an old part of the city filled with warehouses, shipping docks, and abandoned buildings. There were no restaurants there, no bars, no houses. Just empty lots, dark alleys, and places where people went when they didn't want to be found. I sat in the living room, staring at the blinking dot on my phone, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. I told myself to wait, to see how long she stayed, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But minutes turned into hours, and she didn't move. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and drove straight to the location. I had no idea what I was about to find, but I knew one thing for sure. My wife had been lying to me, and I was about to find out exactly why. The drive to that location felt like the longest I had ever taken, even though it only took about 15 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, but the pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight in my chest. I kept trying to come up with some innocent explanation, but there wasn't one. What possible reason could my wife have for being at an abandoned warehouse in the middle of the night? There was no work event, no friend's house, no errand that could justify it. As I got closer, the streets became quieter, the buildings more desolate, and my stomach twisted tighter with every passing second. When I finally reached the location, I pulled over a few blocks away and killed my headlights, my pulse hammering in my ears. The warehouse looked like it had been out of business for years. Tall, metal walls covered in graffiti, with shattered windows and a rusted chain-link fence surrounding the lot. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a crime documentary, not somewhere your wife should be parked late at night. But there, sitting just inside the fence, was her minivan. The sight of it felt like a punch to the gut. Seeing the familiar car in such a place made it real in a way that nothing else had. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't insecurity. She was here, doing something she shouldn't be doing, and I was about to find out exactly what. I parked down the street, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The air was cold and heavy, thick with the scent of damp concrete and rust. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself forward, sticking to the shadows as I approached the warehouse. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do when I found her. I just knew I had to see it with my own eyes. As I got closer, I could hear the faint murmur of voices from inside. It wasn't just her. There was someone else with her. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I crept toward one of the broken windows, crouching low so I wouldn't be seen. The inside of the warehouse was dimly lit by a few overhead lights, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. And there she was, Lisa, standing near the center of the room, her arms wrapped around another man. He was taller than me, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket. His hands were on her waist, pulling her close as they whispered to each other. My stomach churned, rage and devastation warring inside me. I felt like I was going to be sick. I wanted to burst in right then and there, scream at her, demand an explanation, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, watching my wife lean in close to this man, laughing softly at something he said. It was a laugh I hadn't heard in months, a laugh I had thought was gone. But no, it wasn't gone. It was right there, just not for me. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, trying to steady my breathing, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. She kissed him. It wasn't hesitant or guilty. It wasn't the kind of kiss you give when you know you're doing something wrong. It was deep, familiar, like she had done it 100 times before. Like she belonged there, in his arms, in that disgusting, filthy warehouse in the middle of the night. Something inside me snapped. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I stood up, stormed toward the rusted side door, and slammed it open so hard it echoed through the building. The sound startled them apart, and Lisa spun around, her face draining of color the moment she saw me. Jason. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, her eyes wide with shock. She looked guilty. Good. The guy beside her turned to me, clearly caught off guard, but he didn't look half as panicked as she did. He just studied me, his expression unreadable. I took a step closer, my entire body trembling with rage, my fist itching to swing at him, at her, at anything that would make this nightmare feel real. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice louder than I intended, echoing through the empty space. Lisa stammered, opening and closing her mouth like a fish gasping for air. Jason, it's not what it looks like, she finally blurted out, her voice desperate. But I had heard enough lies from her to last a lifetime. Not what it looks like? I laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. I watched you, Lisa. I saw you kiss him. So go ahead, tell me what this actually is. She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care. She didn't get to play the victim. Not now. Not after this. I was going to tell you, she whispered, like that made any of this better. Tell me what? I shot back. That you've been sneaking off in the middle of the night to meet some guy in an abandoned warehouse? That you've been lying to me for months? My voice cracked on the last word, the betrayal cutting deeper than I had expected. She shook her head furiously. No, Jason, it's God. I messed up, okay? But it's not what you think. It's not serious. It didn't mean anything. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Didn't mean anything? Lisa, do you even hear yourself? I turned to the guy, who had been standing there silently like he was watching a damn soap opera, and narrowed my eyes. Who the hell are you? He smirked, like this whole thing was amusing to him. Name's Derek, he said casually, like we were old buddies just meeting for the first time. That smug, careless attitude sent a fresh wave of fury through me. I took a step closer, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Derek, huh? I hissed. Well, Derek, why don't you explain why you're here with my wife? Lisa stepped between us before anything could escalate. Jason, please. Just let me explain, she pleaded, placing a hand on my chest, but I shoved it away. Explain? You want to explain? My voice was shaking now. Lisa, there is nothing you can say that will make this okay. She looked desperate now, her eyes darting between me and Derek like she was trying to figure out how to dig herself out of this hole. But there was no digging out of this. I had seen enough. I had all the proof I needed. I took a step back, shaking my head. You know what? I don't even want to hear it. I muttered, my voice hollow. I hope he was worth it, Lisa. Because whatever this is, we're done. I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart hammering, my whole world crumbling around me. I could hear her calling my name behind me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because in that moment, I knew my marriage was over. I don't remember much about the drive home that night. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my entire body stiff with rage and disbelief, but my mind was somewhere else, floating between the burning image of Lisa in that bastard's arms and the realization that the life I thought I had was nothing more than an illusion. The quiet of the night only made it worse. No traffic, no distractions, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the relentless pounding in my chest. Every time I blinked, I saw her, saw them, saw that smug son of a bitch standing there like I was the intruder, like I was the problem. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. I walked inside, the house feeling colder than ever, a house that used to feel like home, but now felt like a cruel joke. The silence pressed down on me, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. Lisa wasn't home yet, and I had no idea when, or if, she would be. I sat on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen, my mind replaying the night over and over. I kept hoping I'd wake up and find out it was all a nightmare, that I'd roll over in bed and see her sleeping beside me like everything was fine. But I wasn't sleeping. This was real. This was my life now. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when I finally heard the minivan pull into the driveway. My body tensed automatically. The door opened, then closed, and I listened to the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She hesitated in the entryway, like she wasn't sure if she should even come inside. I didn't look at her when she finally walked into the living room, but I could feel her staring at me. Jason, she started, her voice soft, cautious, but I held up a hand before she could continue. Don't, I said flatly, my eyes still locked on the TV screen. Just don't. She let out a shaky breath, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw her fold her arms over her chest. Can we at least talk? She asked, her voice carefully measured, like she was trying to keep control of the situation. I turned to look at her then, my stomach twisting at the sight of her still wearing that dress, the same one she had put on before going to see him. She must have realized it too because she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Talk, I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. Lisa, what exactly do you think there is to talk about? I saw you. I saw everything. She shook her head quickly, her eyes glistening. No, you don't understand. It's not. Don't even try it. I cut her off sharply, my patience snapping like a rubber band stretched too tight. Don't you dare sit here and try to tell me I didn't see what I just saw. She swallowed hard, her breath hitching as she stepped closer, but I stood up before she could get too close. I needed distance. I needed space between me and whatever excuse she was about to throw at me. She bit her lip, like she was scrambling for the right thing to say, and for a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd tell me the truth. But no, that would have been too easy. Instead, she went into damage control mode, like I was a client she needed to smooth things over with. I swear, Jason, I wasn't planning on it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said quickly, her hands twisting together like she was wringing out a towel. Derek and I, we just... You and Derek? I snapped, the taste of his name sour in my mouth. Jesus, Lisa. How long? Her mouth opened, then closed. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for me to know that whatever she was about to say next was a lie. It hasn't been that long, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. That long? I repeated, shaking my head. So what? A few weeks? A few months? Longer? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. You know what? I said, running a hand over my face, exhaustion weighing down on me like a heavy blanket. I don't even care. I don't need the details. I don't need to know why or how or when. Because none of it matters, Lisa. The only thing that matters is that you lied to me. Over and over. You let me believe we were okay while you were sneaking around like Summer. It didn't mean anything, she blurted out suddenly, her voice desperate. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. Didn't mean anything? I echoed slowly. Are you serious right now? You threw away our marriage, our family, for something that didn't mean anything. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not sympathy, not even anger anymore. Just a deep, hollow emptiness where my love for her used to be. She took another step toward me, reaching out like she was expecting me to hold her, to comfort her, and that was what broke me. Jason, please, she whispered. I still love you. I do. This was a mistake. I pulled back before she could touch me, my voice low and cold. No, Lisa, you don't get to say that. You don't get to stand there and cry and pretend that you're the victim here. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like real regret. But it was too little, too late. I turned away, heading for the stairs. Where are you going? She asked, her voice shaking. To bed, I said simply, not looking back. I'll figure out the rest in the morning. Jason. I ignored her and kept walking. I could hear her crying downstairs, but I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted. She could feel as guilty as she wanted. But it wouldn't change anything. Nothing would. Because the moment I saw her with him, something inside me shattered. And no amount of apologies could ever put it back together. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional creak of the floorboards downstairs as Lisa paced back and forth. I could picture her perfectly, wringing her hands, whispering to herself, probably practicing whatever weak excuse she planned to throw at me in the morning. But I didn't care. I had spent so much time trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand how she could do this, how she could lie to my face for months and still come home and play the role of devoted wife and mother. But the truth was, I would never understand it. There was no logic in betrayal, no explanation that would make it hurt any less. And by the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I knew what I had to do. When I finally got out of bed, Lisa was already in the kitchen, looking like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were puffy, her makeup from the night before smudged and half wiped away, and she was still wearing that damn dress. The sight of it made my stomach turn. How had I not seen it before? The way she got dressed up, the way she made excuses, the way she looked through me like I was just some obstacle in her way instead of her husband. I had been so blind. She turned when she heard me enter, and for a second, it almost felt normal, like any other morning, like she was about to ask if I wanted coffee. But then reality crashed down around us, and the air between us thickened with the weight of everything left unsaid. Jason, please, she started, her voice hoarse from crying. Can we just talk? I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms, feeling the cold, sharp edge of anger settle into my bones. Talk? I repeated, my voice low and controlled. What is there left to talk about, Lisa? You cheated. You lied. You snuck around for months and only admitted it when you got caught. What part of that needs more explanation? She flinched like I had slapped her, but I didn't care. She deserved worse than words. She looked down, swallowing hard, and I could tell she was trying to piece together the right thing to say, something that would make me believe this was just some horrible mistake instead of a calculated betrayal. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered, her hands shaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that felt like gravel in my throat. Yeah? Well, you did. So congratulations. She wiped at her eyes, frustration creeping into her features now, like she was the one who had a right to be upset. It wasn't serious, Jason, she insisted. It wasn't like I was planning to leave you. Don't. I cut her off sharply, shaking my head. Don't stand there and try to downplay it. Don't tell me it wasn't serious like that makes it better. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea what it felt like to see you with him? My voice cracked slightly on the last word, but I forced myself to keep going. You lied to me. Every single time you left this house and looked me in the eye, you were lying. And you expect me to just, what? Be okay with that? Move past it because you suddenly feel guilty? She inhaled sharply, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. I could see it then, the slow realization creeping over her that there was no fixing this, no taking it back. She had played her game, taken her risks, and now the consequences were slamming into her full force. She sank into the chair at the kitchen table, rubbing her temples. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I exhaled slowly, the last bit of fight draining out of me. There's nothing to say, Lisa. I glanced toward the hallway where our kids' rooms were, and a fresh wave of anger burned through me. Did you even think about them? About what this would do to them? Her face crumpled, and she shook her head quickly. Of course I did. I love them. Jason, I love you. I barked out a bitter laugh. You love me. I repeated, shaking my head. That's rich. You don't cheat on someone you love, Lisa. You don't betray them, lie to them, treat them like a fool. She stared at me, her hands clutching the edge of the table like she was afraid she might collapse. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, the desperation thick in her voice now. I don't want to lose us. I clenched my jaw, my fists tightening at my sides. You already did. The words felt final, and for the first time, I saw panic flash across her face. Jason, please, she choked out, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Don't just throw this away. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can ill. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Stop, I said, my voice steady. This isn't something we fix, Lisa. This isn't some rough patch or misunderstanding. You made a choice. Over and over. And I'm making one now. She shook her head furiously, her breathing coming in shallow gasps. But I love you, she whispered again, as if saying it enough times would erase everything. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair, exhaustion washing over me. Maybe you do, I said finally. But not enough. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She knew, just as I did, that this was the end. No more excuses. No more fake apologies. No more pretending that we could somehow rewind time and undo what she had done. I turned away, heading toward the stairs, needing to put as much space between us as possible. I could hear her sobbing behind me, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Because no matter how much it hurt, no matter how many years we had spent together, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Lisa had destroyed us, and there was no coming back from it. The morning after felt surreal, like I was watching my own life from a distance rather than living it. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel deafening: the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the occasional creak of the floorboards upstairs as Lisa moved around. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my untouched cup of coffee, my mind circling the same thought over and over. How the hell did we get here? Just a few days ago, I thought I had a marriage, a family, a future with the woman I built my life with. Now, all I had were broken promises, unanswered questions, and a hollow ache in my chest that refused to fade. Lisa hadn't spoken to me since last night. I knew she was giving me space, probably trying to figure out what to say, what angle to take to make me believe this wasn't as bad as it was. But there was no version of this where we moved on like nothing happened. She had taken something from me, something that I could never get back. My trust, my security, my belief that no matter what, we were a team. She had shattered that the second she walked into that warehouse with him, the second she touched him the way she used to touch me. And now, here we were, two people who used to be everything to each other, sitting in the same house, breathing the same air, but feeling like strangers. Eventually, she came downstairs. I didn't look up when I heard her footsteps, but I could feel her hesitation as she lingered by the doorway. Jason, she said softly, like she was afraid I might shatter if she spoke too loudly. Can we talk? I let out a slow breath, steadying myself before looking up at her. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but I didn't feel sorry for her. This was her mess, her consequences. There's nothing left to talk about, I said, my voice calm, steady. I made my decision last night. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, stepping closer. Jason, please, we can work through this. I know I messed up, but we have a family. We have history. You can't just throw that away. I clenched my jaw, pushing back the surge of frustration boiling inside me. I'm not the one who threw it away, Lisa. You did. Every time you snuck out, every time you lied to my face, every time you went to him instead of me. My voice was sharper now, the hurt breaking through despite my best efforts to keep it locked away. I can't be with someone I don't trust. And I sure as hell can't stay married to someone who betrayed me like this. Her face crumpled, and she took another step forward, but I stood up before she could reach me. I needed space. I needed distance. So what happens now? She asked, her voice cracking. I ran a hand over my face, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I can't stay here. Not like this. The words felt final, and maybe they were. Because no matter how much history we had, no matter how many years we spent together, I couldn't ignore the fact that every time I looked at her now, all I saw was her with him. Lisa let out a shaky breath, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Do you really think divorce is the only option? She whispered. I met her gaze, and for a moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. The one who used to make me laugh, who used to be my best friend, who used to look at me like I was the only man in the world. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had lied to me without hesitation, who had risked everything we built for something cheap and meaningless. I don't see any other way, I said finally. She let out a quiet sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and I looked away. I couldn't do this anymore. I turned toward the stairs, needing to put some distance between us before I said something I would regret. I'll stay in the guest room for now, I muttered. But we need to figure out what's next. For the kids, for everything. Lisa nodded numbly, tears streaking down her face, but she didn't argue. Because we both knew the truth, this wasn't something we could come back from. This was the end of us. And no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much I wished I could rewind time and make this nightmare disappear, I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better than this. And for the first time in a long time, I was going to put myself first. The days that followed were filled with an exhausting mixture of tense conversations, silent avoidance, and the crushing weight of finality settling over everything. Lisa and I operated like two ghosts in the same house, drifting past each other, speaking only when absolutely necessary, always careful to keep our voices neutral when the kids were around. That was the hardest part, pretending everything was fine when everything had already fallen apart. Our children were too young to understand what was happening, but I knew they could feel it. The weight of the unspoken, the way their mother's eyes looked red and tired, the way their father barely spoke at the dinner table anymore. I hated that they were caught in the middle of this mess, that Lisa's selfishness had ripped apart the family they trusted to always be there for them. But no matter how much I wanted to scream, to let my anger consume me, I couldn't do that to them. They deserved better. I started making arrangements almost immediately, unable to stomach the idea of staying under the same roof for much longer. The house, once a place of warmth and security, now felt suffocating, like every corner held a piece of a life that no longer existed. The framed wedding photos on the wall, the coffee mugs we used to bicker over, the couch where we'd sit together on lazy Sundays, all of it had become a cruel reminder of how quickly everything could be destroyed. I wasn't going to be the one to leave, though. Why should I? This was my home, too. I had built this life just as much as she had, and I wasn't about to let her selfish decisions push me out. Instead, I told Lisa she needed to go. It wasn't even a discussion. I didn't care where she went, to her parents' house, to a friend's, hell, even to his place if that was what she wanted, but she wasn't staying here. Not with me. Not after everything she had done. At first, she resisted, her voice small and pleading as she tried to convince me that we could figure things out, that she didn't want to uproot the kids, that she still loved me. I had to laugh at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous that she thought those words meant anything anymore. Love? Love wasn't lying to my face, sneaking off in the middle of the night, and betraying every vow we had made to each other. Love wasn't running into the arms of another man while still expecting me to hold on to the shattered pieces of our marriage. If she had truly loved me, she wouldn't have done what she did. And I told her exactly that. Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but I had nothing left to give her. I wasn't going to comfort her, wasn't going to pretend that I still saw her as my wife. That version of us was dead, and she was the one who killed it. Eventually, she agreed to leave, though not without one last pathetic attempt at convincing me that we could salvage something. I let her talk, let her ramble about therapy, about working through this, about how she didn't want to throw away 10 years together. But I just stood there, arms crossed, unmoved by every desperate plea. She had already thrown it away, she just hadn't expected to get caught. When she finally realized I wasn't budging, she packed a bag and left, her shoulders hunched, her face streaked with silent tears. I watched from the window as she drove off, wondering if she was going to her parents or straight into his arms. It didn't matter anymore. Wherever she was going, it wasn't my concern. The first night without her should have felt freeing, but instead, it was just hollow. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than just my body, it was in my soul. The betrayal still sat heavy in my chest, a wound that I knew would take a long time to heal. But despite everything, there was also relief. Because for the first time in months, I didn't have to wonder where she was. I didn't have to check her phone when she wasn't looking, didn't have to question every late night and every flimsy excuse. The lies had stopped, and even though the truth had wrecked me, at least I wasn't drowning in doubt anymore. Over the next few weeks, I focused on one thing: moving forward. I met with a lawyer, started the divorce process, and made sure I had everything lined up to protect myself and my kids. Lisa didn't fight me on it. Maybe she knew she had no ground to stand on, or maybe she just felt too guilty to try. Either way, I didn't care. I wasn't interested in revenge or making her life hell. I just wanted to be done with her. She would still be in my life because of the kids, but as far as I was concerned, our relationship was nothing more than a legal process now. It wasn't easy. Some days, I felt like I was doing fine, like I was finally reclaiming my life. Other days, I'd wake up and feel the weight of everything all over again, like a punch to the gut that I hadn't been prepared for. The worst part was the memories, the way they sneaked up on me when I least expected it. Folding laundry and remembering the way she used to steal my hoodies. Watching a movie with the kids and realizing we had first seen it together on one of our early dates. Even something as simple as hearing a song on the radio could send me spiraling back to a time when I still believed she was mine and mine alone. But no matter how hard those moments were, I reminded myself of one thing. I deserved better. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't some flawless husband who never made mistakes. But I had been loyal. I had given her my trust, my love, my commitment, and she had thrown it away without a second thought. That wasn't on me. That was on her. And I refused to let her choices define the rest of my life. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the spot where Lisa used to make her morning coffee. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt done. Done mourning, done questioning, done letting her have control over my emotions. She was my past, and I was finally ready to focus on my future. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Maybe not completely healed, maybe not entirely over it, but lighter. And that was enough.